Floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, President. Your Excellency, Minister, we welcome you as President of this Security Council meeting. We thank the Secretary-General of the United Nations for his briefing on the situation around the Korean Peninsula. There can be no doubt that currently we are living through one of the most acute and dramatic phases in the development of the situation on the Korean Peninsula. It is possible to say without exaggeration that peace in this region is subject to serious tests, and the threat of the increase in, or the transition in the confrontation to a hotspot is very great. Military rhetoric accompanied by a test of strength between the participants has led to a situation where around the world people have begun to wonder whether there will be war or not. As is known, in the conditions of such tension, one ill-thought-out or misinterpreted step could lead to lamentable consequences. Russia has observed with concern the development of the situation in the region, the dangerous development indeed. Of course, we are united in our condemnation of the provocatory nuclear missile activity of Pyongyang, which in the last 18 months has taken on a dangerous trend. The situation is unacceptable when the latest launch is made without any prior notification from North Korean territory, subjecting the lives of citizens to risk, including those who are transiting through the air and sea in the region. We reject this activity by the DPRK, which confirms our support for all of the UN sanction activity, which we are unswervingly implementing. We call on the North Korean authorities to wind down their banned programs and to return to the non-proliferation regime of the NPT and also the IAEA as a non-nuclear state. At the same time, it should be clear to everybody that the DPRK is hardly going to refrain from its nuclear missile program while it feels a direct threat to its security. Indeed, this is how Pyongyang evaluates the regular wide-scale maneuvers and exercises by the United States and its allies in the region. President, on the international sanctions on DPRK, once again we would like to confirm our commitment to their implementation. Having said that, and we have emphasized this time and again, such measures should not be an end in themselves, but rather an instrument for drawing the country into constructive negotiations on substantive issues. Diplomacy isn't just sanctions. Sanctions aren't diplomacy, as some partners are trying to convince us. At least, it's not diplomacy in the traditional sense. It is an extreme instrument of involving people when all other methods have been exhausted. There is a whole range of different other methods within the diplomatic arsenal. In all sanctions decisions of the Council, there are also the requirement to fulfill a political component, which unfortunately many people have forgotten about, focusing instead only on restrictions. Resolving the nuclear issue is not possible just through pressure on Pyongyang and through sanctions. Sanctions should not be used to stifle the country in economic terms or to improve the humanitarian situation. This is particularly the case to unilateral restrictions, which affect civilian sectors which aren't connected with the nuclear missile program of the country. These sanctions are the reason for a serious worsening in the living conditions of the population. Furthermore, unilateral limits which circumvent or add what's being done through the Security Council undermine the effective implementation of the Security Council's decisions on the political settlement of the situation on the Korean Peninsula, not to mention the damage that's being done to the legal interests of third countries. And incidentally, I'd like to say to the distinguished Secretary of State that the North Korean workers aren't working in Russia in slave-like conditions. They're working on the basis of an intergovernmental agreement with the DPRK which guarantees their rights. Incidentally, Secretary of State, since I'm already addressing you, we very much hope that the US will be able to help to resolve the crisis in the Korean Peninsula. Mentioning the sanction regimes within the Security Council, we have to recognise that the humanitarian exemptions that were identified under them aren't working. This has been said by the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs recently in a briefing to the Specialised Committee 1718 of the Security Council. The ban on correspondence with banks in DPRK has made it difficult not only to procure food and goods for the national economy from abroad, but also the financing of those UN agencies that are working within the country. President, without question, DPRK's refusal to fulfil the corresponding Security Council resolutions is unacceptable. At the same time, we cannot allow any attempts to resolve these long-standing problems in the region just through military means. It's enough to look at the history of the Korean War to understand what that would mean. In the current conditions, we unswervingly call on all of the parties to not allow further escalation in tension, which accompanies each new cycle of reaction and counter-reaction. There is a need to review the policy of mutual pressure and intimidation. It won't bring us any results. We assume that there is a need for a comprehensive approach to resolving the situation. The denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is impossible without the general normalization of military political situation and refusing the increase in military infrastructure, including the deployment in the region of elements of the US global missile defense system, and also without cuts in the scale of the maneuvers carried out, and without founding the atmosphere of trust between the states in Northeast Asia. Unfortunately, recently we are seeing the reverse trend. 2.5 months of quiet from the point of Pyongyang were answered by Washington and its allies by unscheduled and unprecedented in their scale maneuvers and exercises in October and December, and also by the introduction of unilateral sanctions and classifying the country among state sponsors of terrorism. All of these steps force us to wonder about the sincerity of statements that suggest that there is a preference for a peaceful approach to resolving the crisis in DPRK. Chairman, we call on the interested parties to quickly take practical steps to de-escalate the situation. In particular, it would be good to refrain from the planned latest military exercises. It goes without question that Pyongyang is also obliged to finish its nuclear missile tests. We are ready for closer cooperation with all partners to aim to find a quick settlement of the issues on the Korean Peninsula, through the only possible means, namely through political and diplomatic means and through a mutually respectful dialogue. This was the aim behind the Russian-Chinese roadmap to settlement. We call on all interested parties in the period of preparation and the holding of the Winter Olympics in South Korea to refrain from any kind of provocation or unconsidered initiatives, and to use this time to find a way through a political and diplomatic settlement. And in conclusion, Chairman, I would like to address Minister Klimkin, who spoke today here. I'd like to advise him, when he speaks to the Security Council, and in his legends that he spoke about what happened in the Ukraine, that he might want to actually keep to the item on the agenda. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for his statement.